Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm checking out the cheapest 1440p gaming monitor that I've ever tested, the Asrock PG27QFT2A. This is a 1440p 180Hz IPS LCD screen that is regularly among the overall cheapest 1440p monitors on the market, with the current asking price of just $185 US. It was only about a year ago when $180 would get you just a 1080p monitor, but with increasing pressure from OLEDs at the high end, LCDs are now cheaper than ever, and the result is a brand new wave of sub $200 1440p options. So what does this low price point get you? Well, the panel isn't anything unusual or weirdly cut down. It's a regular 27-inch 1440p 180Hz IPS LCD from BOE, like we've seen in many other monitors. It supports adaptive sync, branded as AMD FreeSync, but it works just fine on NVIDIA GPUs too, plus it packs a pretty typical spec sheet including 1 millisecond MPRT response times and 99% coverage of sRGB. The design of the PG27QFT2A is a little better than expected from an entry-level 1440p monitor. It is quite basic, with most of the outer surfaces being a standard, fairly cheap matte black plastic. The build quality is nothing special, plenty of seams between the various panels used in the assembly, and the rear panel doesn't look amazing, though I wouldn't go as far as calling it ugly. But what this Asrock monitor does have on its side are two advantages. Firstly, it has a height adjustable stand, which you don't always get on low-cost monitors. This gives it a decent range of ergonomic adjustability, and it's reasonably sturdy overall. Secondly, it includes a built-in Wi-Fi antenna, which is a feature I haven't seen before on a display. There are two threaded antenna ports on the back of the display, and with the included cable you can screw it directly into the Wi-Fi ports on your motherboard instead of using the small and often flimsy antenna that comes with the board. It keeps everything tidy and out of the way. The port selection is very basic, just one DisplayPort 1.4 and two HDMI 2.0 ports. You can access the full 180Hz through the DP connection, but HDMI is limited to just 144Hz, so they really should be HDMI 2.1 ports to support the full refresh rate. But I can forgive this a bit on a value-oriented monitor, given the additional cost to add in HDMI 2.1 functionality. Another area that's super basic is the OSD. We're not getting a directional toggle here, with Asrock instead opting for more difficult to operate face buttons. This doesn't matter too much because there are virtually no features in the OSD. It's some very simple color controls and an input selector with really nothing else. If you're after a product with more gaming specific features, then you'll have to look elsewhere, but again, it seems appropriate to cut that stuff out on a budget product. One questionable area that's been cut back though is the overdrive controls. This Asrock monitor features just two overdrive settings, on or off, with no ability to change the level of overdrive once it's enabled. Furthermore, both settings perform quite similarly. For example, here is how the monitor performs with overdrive off at 180Hz, a 10.8 millisecond average response time, no overshoot, and a cumulative deviation of 668. When we turn overdrive on, that improves to 9.7 milliseconds, still no overshoot, and a cumulative deviation average of 596. I feel like there is a lot left in the tank here when it comes to response time optimization, especially as with overdrive on, we get poor refresh rate compliance, indicating the response times are too slow to handle the 180Hz refresh rate. Now, the positive aspect to this conservative overdrive implementation is that performance is good at lower refresh rates. So if you're playing around the 100 to 60Hz mark, response times improve to around 8 milliseconds, there's no inverse ghosting artifacts, and cumulative deviation is okay. I've seen some previous budget models that either have crazy artifacts on lower refreshers or are ludicrously slow using optimized 60Hz settings, but this Asrock monitor performs acceptably. With that said, I don't think this monitor qualifies as having a single overdrive mode experience because it doesn't reach adequate levels of speed at higher refresh rates. Refresh rate compliance indicates that this monitor is only fast enough to properly support a 120 to 130Hz refresh, at least based on our metrics, though you will benefit from a smoother presentation at 180Hz even if motion clarity hits a wall. Let's see how this compares to other monitors before judging whether this is good enough at this price point. At 180Hz, the PG27QFT2A is pretty slow, falling behind most other 1440p monitors that I've tested recently. It's not the slowest I've seen. The ViewSonic I checked out a few years ago was pretty bad, but clearly up against products that typically retail for over $250 US, this Asrock monitor isn't as well tuned. The AOC 24G4 has previously been a great buy below $200, and while it does have a 1080p panel, it's a much faster display. However, the PG27QFT2A is much more competitive when examining the refresh rate range on average. We're still not talking about an especially fast monitor. Better tuned products like the Asus XG27ACS and MSI MAG274QPF-QD are around 40% faster, but how the Asrock performs isn't unusual among budget products. It delivers a similar response time average to the Gigabyte M27QP, MSI G274QPF-QD, and Pixio PX277 Pro, which have all been decent lower cost monitors at various points in time. This is also seen in cumulative deviation, which measures the balance between speed and overshoot. This Asrock model is pretty similar to bang for buck MSI and Gigabyte competition, just sneaking below an average of 600. The best tuned models like the XG27ACS are around 23% better in this metric, but the PG27QFT2A is among the typical IPS pack and isn't horribly slow like with the ViewSonic. There's also no dark smearing, a common artifact on budget VA panels. It's really the lack of a faster overdrive setting for 180Hz gaming that lets this product down from being even better in its class. For fixed refresh rate gaming at 120Hz, the results are pretty similar to what we saw on average. At 60Hz, this is a mid-table monitor, again showing that Asrock have optimized it for lower refresh rate gaming more so than higher refresh rate gaming. Asrock also provide a backlight strobing mode labeled MPRT, which is a very simple on-off toggle with no other settings. This mode does increase clarity, but is very restrictive as it only works at fixed refresh rates. It requires a constant frame rate that matches the refresh rate, and brightness is reduced to just 102 nits with no ability to change the brightness setting. There's also some strobe crosstalk presenting as a double image, along with red fringing artifacts. Input lag is good with a processing delay of 0.7 milliseconds and a reasonable refresh rate, so its responsiveness is similar to other monitors at this refresh. The reason it falls down the chart is that total lag, which includes response times, is on the lower side, but this is still a very usable result. Power consumption is excellent, pointing to this Asrock monitor being quite efficient. Its basic design and lack of RGB LED lighting probably helps a bit in this regard, but in any case it consumes under 20 watts of power to display 200 nits, which is a great result. The PG27QFT2A is a wide gamut monitor, but its coverage of P3 isn't especially large at just 92.7%, though this does exceed what Asrock advertise. In total, this gives us 71.7% coverage of Rec 2020, which is in the lower part of the table among similar gaming monitors. Most displays today do support some form of wide gamut, so this is not a huge selling point. Factory calibration is mediocre, with my unit having a blue/cold tint from the factory. Adherence to sRGB gamma is decent, but the incorrect white balance leads to poor delta E's. Due to the wide color gamut, there's also a bit of oversaturation out of the box for SDR content such as YouTube videos, but it isn't too oversaturated, a pretty common theme for budget displays. Compared to other monitors, this Asrock model isn't especially well tuned from the factory for grayscale, though in Color Checker it's saved by a smaller color gamut than other monitors. Unfortunately, with the OSD being so simple and not having very many features, there's no sRGB emulation mode. This means there's no way to improve sRGB accuracy outside of a software calibration. Many other monitors do provide sRGB modes, so in comparison this further hurts the standing of the Asrock model. It is possible to fix this monitor's color accuracy through a full software calibration, which I performed using CalMan. The panel itself is very capable of producing an accurate experience, especially for sRGB and less so for P3. It just seems Asrock haven't put in much effort to calibrate it from the factory. I guess that's understandable when the goal is to produce a low-cost product. Maximum brightness is good at 417 nits, which is right among the pack of other IPS LCDs. Minimum brightness is on the high side though at 80 nits, so the range of available brightness is a bit limited. The contrast ratio is one of the areas that the PG27QFT2A performs particularly well, delivering 1549:1, which is higher than average for an IPS LCD. Overall, IPS LCDs still have poor contrast, and this is especially evident up against VAs like the Q27G3XMN, but when buying an IPS you really don't want the contrast to end up below 1000:1. This model has 90% higher contrast than the LG 27GP83B and 65% higher contrast than the MSI G274QPF-QD that we've recommended, which is a fantastic result. Another reason to go with an IPS LCD in the budget class over VA or especially TN panels is its viewing angles, which are decent on this panel. Probably not the best example of an IPS that I've ever seen, but the sweet spot for viewing is large and comfortable. Uniformity with my unit wasn't the best, the central area was acceptable, but there was a noticeable deviation at the corners, so it doesn't have good edge-to-edge uniformity. Still good enough for gaming, but it's something I noticed during use. Next up is the Essentials checklist. Asrock unfortunately make a couple of blunders with this monitor. Their product page features misleading images that exaggerate the thinness of the bezels, when in reality the monitor has pretty normal bezels. In addition to this, the monitor is advertised as HDR capable with display HDR 400, but in reality it's a fake HDR product with no local dimming and therefore no hardware HDR capabilities. I do not consider this type of product to be HDR capable and strongly believe it shouldn't be advertised as supporting HDR, even if it can technically accept an HDR signal. However, other aspects to advertising are accurate, including its contrast ratio and P3 gamut coverage, both of which are a bit underreported. The feature support matrix is a bit brutal for a budget product, which isn't really designed to include a ton of features, as price is the main consideration. I don't really expect a product at this price to include heaps of USB ports or fantastic HDR support, though it shouldn't be advertised as HDR capable. I think the most relevant checklist fails that could have been included here are good refresh compliance, a directional OSD toggle, and an sRGB mode. I gave a borderline result for HDR10 as it technically accepts an HDR signal input but can't really display it properly. Overall, I'm quite impressed that we're now able to get reasonable 27-inch 1440p gaming monitors at price points below $200 US. Every year, these monitors seem to get a bit cheaper, and it's great to see Asrock setting the tone with their $185 PG27QFT2A. When looking at budget, low-cost, entry-level products, the criteria for what makes a good monitor is a bit different to mid-range and higher-tier models. What I'm mostly looking for is a nice balance to performance with no obvious flaws or major drawbacks. For example, in the days where TN LCDs dominated the entry level, a major flaw with those panels were their awful viewing angles. Today, with IPS LCD at the low end, that's not a concern. Similarly, when VA LCDs were all the rage, you had to put up with dark smearing. Again, not a concern with this Asrock monitor. So it gets off to a pretty good start, also including a height adjustable stand, a unique integrated Wi-Fi antenna, no observable flickering, and low input lag. There's a few features that would have been nice additions to strengthen the package, like an sRGB mode or a USB hub, but they aren't deal breakers. Most of the basics have been nailed here. The biggest issue with the PG27QFT2A is its slow response time performance at 180Hz and limited overdrive settings. But in the middle and lower parts of the refresh rate range, this model performs much the same as other low-cost 1440p monitors I've tested. It's far from a bad experience, and boy, have I seen some poorly tuned products over the years. Asrock also haven't put much effort into color calibration, so don't expect a super accurate experience out of the box. But the fundamentals are there for a nice color experience. There's a sprinkling of wide color gamut, a great contrast ratio for an IPS, decent brightness, good viewing angles. It looks good and provides a solid, if basic, gaming experience. At $185 US, I think this is a pretty great deal for entry-level gamers, and I would definitely opt for a 1440p panel over a 1080p panel in this price range. It's even been available for as low as $160 US, which is a steal. There are better products out there offering similar specs, like the MSI G274QPF-QD, Asus XG27ACS, Gigabyte M27Q, LG 27GP850, just to name a few. Better tuning and color accuracy, wider color gamuts, more features are common benefits to grabbing one of those higher tier models. But they're much more expensive, usually costing at least $250 US, which gets very close to the HDR-capable AOC Q27G3XMN in price. Right now, they just aren't worth a 35% price premium or more, and in some cases they're $100 more expensive, which is impossible to justify. The Asrock model offers far greater bang for buck. The value proposition could vary in your region, but provided the Asrock model is a little cheaper than some of the others I've been talking about, it's well worth considering, and there's links in the description below to check current pricing. Anyway, that's it for this review of this budget Asrock monitor. Always love getting back to check some budget low-cost models, and this seems to be a particularly compelling option. So hopefully we see it maintain its sub $200 price throughout the rest of the year. And if it can get back down to $160, it's a great product, so definitely check this one out. If you do want to support our testing and analysis here at Hardware Unboxed/Monitors Unboxed, we have our Patreon and Floatplane accounts, links to those in the description below. If you sign up, you'll gain access to things like the ICC calibration profiles that we create during these reviews. We've also got our Discord chat, which is a great place to get monitor recommendations. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.